She walked into his boardroom wearing last season's heels and a confidence that cost nothing. Big Boss Darius looked up from his mahogany desk, and for the first time in 30 years of closing billion-dollar deals, he felt his pulse quicken. The woman standing before him wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be across town, cleaning his rival's penthouse as part of her housekeeping service. But someone had mixed up the schedules, and now here she was. Sophie Crane, the woman who'd somehow slipped a handwritten note into his jacket pocket at a restaurant 3 weeks ago. A note that simply read, "Your loneliness is showing, sir. It doesn't suit you." He'd had his people search for her ever since, and now, by pure accident, she was standing in his office, holding a mop, looking at him like he was just another man. Nobody had looked at him like that in decades. Before we get into how this impossible situation unfolds, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. This story's got more twists than a coastal highway, and you're going to want to be here for every single turn. Let's get into it. Sophie Crane had been cleaning penthouses in Atlanta for 4 years, ever since her catering business went under during the pandemic. At 38, she'd learned that pride was expensive and survival required flexibility. She wasn't ashamed of the work. Honest money spent the same as any other, but she'd be lying if she said it didn't sting sometimes, scrubbing toilets for people who wouldn't remember her face 5 minutes after she left. 3 weeks ago, she'd been working a private event at Ray's on the River, filling in for her friend who'd called in sick. The venue was hosting some kind of business dinner, the kind where men in custom suits discussed numbers that could fund small countries. She'd been clearing plates from a corner table when she noticed him, Darius Kincaid Monroe. Though she didn't know his name then, she just knew he was sitting alone despite being surrounded by 20 people. The loneliest man in a room full of companions, something about the way he held his wine glass. The distant look in his eyes despite the forced smile, it reminded her of her late father in his final years. Successful, respected, and utterly alone. Before she could stop herself, she'd slipped a napkin note into his jacket pocket when she collected his plate. By the time she realized how incredibly stupid and presumptuous that was, she was already in the kitchen, and the moment had passed. She figured he'd throw it away. Rich men didn't read notes from the help, except apparently this one did. Darius Kincaid Monroe. Big Boss Darius, to everyone in Atlanta's upper circles, sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Monroe Tower, a building he'd designed himself. At 62, he'd built an empire that spanned real estate, tech investments, and luxury hospitality. His signature white suit and fedora were as recognizable in Atlanta as the Coca-Cola logo. He owned homes in 6 cities, drove cars that cost more than most houses, and could get a table at any restaurant in the world with a single phone call. He was also, as that note had so accurately observed, profoundly lonely. His marriage had ended 15 years ago, amicably, thankfully, but since then, every woman who approached him saw dollar signs before they saw him. Every date felt like a business transaction, every smile calculated, every touch transactional. He'd stopped trying 3 years ago, resigning himself to the reality that genuine connection wasn't something money could buy. Then came that note, 7 words that had haunted him for 3 weeks. "Your loneliness is showing, sir. It doesn't suit you." He'd had his security team pull the venue's staff list, cross-referenced with the catering company's employee roster, and track down exactly 1 server who fit the timeline. Sophie Crane, age 38, owner of a defunct catering business, currently working for Elite Home Services. He'd memorized her file, studied her face from the grainy security footage, and debated for 2 weeks whether contacting her would be creepy or romantic. Then fate intervened. His assistant had accidentally scheduled Elite Home Services to send someone to his office for a deep clean, a service meant for his Buckhead penthouse. By the time the mistake was caught, Sophie was already in the elevator, heading up with her supplies. Darius had dismissed his assistant, told security to let her through, and waited. His heart hadn't beaten this fast since his first $1 million deal in 1989. Now she stood in his office, her strawberry blonde hair pulled into a practical ponytail, green eyes wide with recognition, and that same fearless energy that had compelled her to write that note radiating from every inch of her 5'6" frame. "You," she said, her voice steady despite the surprise written across her face. "Me," Darius confirmed, rising from his chair. "Though I believe you already knew that when you left your note." Sophie's cheeks flushed not with embarrassment, he noted, but with something closer to defiance. "I didn't expect you'd actually read it. Most men like you don't notice people like me." "Most men like me are fools," Darius said, moving around his desk with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his power. "And you underestimate your visibility, Miss Crane. You're rather difficult to forget." She set down her cleaning caddy with a deliberate thunk. "Is this the part where the billionaire makes an indecent proposal to the housekeeper? Because I've seen that movie, Mr. Monroe, and I'm not interested in being anyone's pretty woman fantasy." Darius laughed, genuinely laughed for the first time in months. Direct. "I appreciate that." He gestured to the sitting area by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Atlanta. "Would you sit with me for a moment? No proposals, indecent or otherwise, just conversation." "I'm on the clock," Sophie said, but her feet were already moving toward the leather sofa. "I'll pay for your time." He saw her stiffen and quickly added, "That came out wrong. I'll call your company and book you for the full day. You'll get paid regardless. But I'd very much like to know why you wrote that note." Sophie sat, but perched on the edge of the sofa like a bird ready to fly. "You really want to know? I've thought about nothing else for 3 weeks." She studied him for a long moment, those green eyes seeing past the suit, past the office, past everything he'd built to shield himself from the world. "My father was a successful man, not your level, but comfortable. President of a manufacturing company in Ohio. He had everything: respect, money, a family who loved him. But after my mom died, he just disappeared inside himself. He'd sit at dinner parties surrounded by people and look exactly the way you looked that night, like he was on an island and everyone else was on the shore, waving at him from a place he couldn't reach anymore." Darius felt something tighten in his chest. What happened to him? "Heart attack at 65. Doctor said stress, but I think it was loneliness. The kind that eats you from the inside out." She met his eyes. "I saw that same look on your face, and I couldn't just walk away. I know it wasn't my place. I know it was presumptuous, and probably crossed about 15 professional boundaries. But it was the kindest thing anyone's done for me in years," Darius said quietly. "And the most honest. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that falls between two people who've accidentally stumbled into truth-telling." "So," Sophie said eventually, a hint of a smile playing at her lips, "now that you've tracked me down like some kind of benevolent stalker, what exactly was your plan?" "I genuinely didn't have one," Darius admitted. "This scheduling mix-up was entirely accidental. My assistant will probably be looking for a new job tomorrow after I'm done thanking her profusely." Sophie laughed, a real unguarded sound that seemed to brighten the entire office. "You're not what I expected. What did you expect?" "I don't know. More? Cold? Calculating? Men with your kind of power usually are." "I can be those things when necessary," Darius said, "but I'm tired of being those things all the time. I'm tired of a lot of things, Miss Crane." "Sophie," she corrected, "if we're having a moment of existential honesty, you should probably use my first name. Sophie." He liked the way it felt saying her name. "I'm Darius. Not Big Boss, not Mr. Monroe, just Darius." "Just Darius," she repeated with a teasing smile. "The billionaire with the white suit collection and loneliness issues. When you put it that way, I sound like a character in a bad romance novel." "Or a really good one," Sophie countered. "Depends on how the story goes." What started as an accidental encounter turned into lunch. Darius canceled his afternoon meetings, something his assistant would later describe as unprecedented and mildly alarming, and took Sophie to a small Italian restaurant in Virginia Highland, the kind of place where the owner knew everyone's name and the pasta was made fresh every morning. Sophie had insisted on somewhere normal, refusing his suggestion of the city's most exclusive French restaurant. "If we're going to have a conversation," she'd said, "I need to be somewhere I won't feel like I'm being judged for using the wrong fork." The restaurant, Nana's Kitchen, was owned by an elderly Italian woman named Rosa, who took one look at Darius's white suit and Sophie's cleaning service polo and immediately assumed they were filming some kind of reality show. She sat them in the back corner, promised discretion, and brought out enough food to feed 8 people. "Tell me something real," Darius said, twirling pasta around his fork. "Something you've never told anyone." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "We're doing deep confessions now? We've known each other for, what, 2 hours? 3 weeks. Technically. I've been thinking about you for 3 weeks. That should count for something." She considered this, sipping her wine. "Okay, something real." She set down her glass. "I'm scared that my best years are behind me. I'm 38, single, broke, and cleaning other people's houses for a living. My business failed. My engagement fell apart. Most days I'm fine with it, I genuinely am, but sometimes I wake up at 3 in the morning and wonder if this is all there is. If I peaked at 30 and everything after is just maintenance." The vulnerability in her voice made Darius want to reach across the table and take her hand, but he sensed that would be overstepping. "You want my honest opinion? That's why I shared. I think you're barely getting started. I didn't make my first real money until I was 42. Before that, I was hustling, failing, rebuilding, and failing again. Success isn't linear, Sophie. Neither is life. And anyone who tells you different is selling something. Easy to say when you're sitting on $1 billion. True, he acknowledged. But money doesn't insulate you from regret, or fear, or loneliness. It just means you can be lonely in nicer places." Sophie laughed, despite herself. "That's the saddest thing I've heard all week, and I watched a documentary about polar bears last night." "Your turn," she said. "Tell me something real." Darius set down his fork, his expression growing serious. "I'm afraid I've forgotten how to be vulnerable. How to let someone see me, really see me, without calculating what they want or what they'll take. Every interaction feels like a negotiation. Every relationship a transaction. I've been alone so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be with someone." "Sir," Sophie said softly, that familiar teasing note back in her voice. "You're blushing." Darius touched his face, surprised. She was right, he could feel the warmth in his cheeks. "I don't blush. You're doing it right now. It's actually kind of adorable if I'm being honest." "Adorable," Darius repeated, shaking his head with a smile. "I've been called many things in my life, but never that. Well, get used to it. If we're going to be friends, I'm not going to treat you like some untouchable deity. You're just a man who wears white suits and apparently blushes when women pay attention to him." "Friends," Darius said, testing the word. "I'd like that." "Good. Because I'm not interested in being anyone's project or charity case. And I'm definitely not interested in whatever sugar daddy dynamic your brain might be cooking up." "The thought never crossed my mind." Darius lied. Badly. "Liar," Sophie said, but she was smiling. "But I appreciate the sentiment." They stayed at Nana's for 3 hours, talking about everything and nothing. Sophie told him about her failed catering business, about the recipes she'd created, about her dream of opening a small cafe someday where people could gather without pretension. Darius told her about his early years. Growing up in South Atlanta, working 3 jobs to put himself through Georgia State, building his first property development with borrowed money and borrowed time. By the time they left, Rosa was convinced they were either secret lovers or future business partners. She refused to let Darius pay, insisting the food was on the house for beautiful love stories. "We're not," Sophie started. Of course not, Rosa said with a knowing wink. And I'm not Italian. Outside, the October afternoon had turned crisp, the kind of weather that made Atlanta feel almost autumnal. Sophie pulled her jacket tighter, and Darius noticed for the first time how worn it was, the cuffs frayed, one button missing. "Can I see you again?" he asked, the question feeling both natural and terrifying. Sophie looked up at him, considering. "This is crazy. You know that, right? We're from completely different worlds. The best stories usually are," Darius said. "Crazy, I mean." "I need to think about it," Sophie said, but her eyes said yes before her mouth did. "Take all the time you need. You have my number. My assistant put it in your phone while you were in the restroom." "She did what?" "I told her to. Don't be mad. I'm a billionaire with boundary issues, remember?" Sophie shook her head, laughing. "You're impossible." "I'm possible," Darius corrected. "Just highly improbable." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Darius?" "Yes?" "Thanks for lunch. And for listening. It's been a while since someone actually listened." "The pleasure was entirely mine, Sophie." He watched her walk to her 15-year-old Honda Civic, watched her drive away, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Sophie called him 3 days later. Not to accept a date, but to tell him she couldn't see him again. "It's not going to work," she said, her voice tight over the phone. "I've been thinking about it, and this whole thing is a fantasy. You're living in one world, I'm living in another, and pretending otherwise is just going to end badly for both of us." Darius was in his car, driving back from a property inspection in Savannah. He pulled over immediately. "What happened? 3 days ago we were fine." "Better than fine. 3 days ago I hadn't Googled you. I hadn't seen the articles about your lifestyle, your yacht, your properties in Monaco and Aspen. I hadn't read about your ex-wife, about the society events, about the kind of world you live in." She paused. "I clean houses, Darius. That's my reality. And I'm not ashamed of it. But I'm also not naive enough to think I fit into your life." "Who says you have to fit into my life? Maybe I want to fit into yours." "That's a sweet thing to say, but it's not realistic. You can't just—" "Have dinner with me tonight," Darius interrupted. "One more time. If you still feel the same way after, I'll respect your decision. But give me one more chance to show you that maybe, just maybe, this isn't as impossible as you think." The silence stretched for so long, he thought she'd hung up. "One dinner," she finally said, "but somewhere normal. No 5-star restaurants, no private chefs, no helicopters. Just normal. I'll pick you up at 7. He showed up at her apartment in Decatur at 6:58 p.m., driving a car that made Sophie burst out laughing when she saw it. A pristine 1967 Chevy Impala, cherry red, clearly restored with love and significant money. "This is your idea of normal?" she asked, climbing in. "This was my first car," Darius said. "Well, not this exact one. The original died in 1995. But I had it rebuilt from memory. It's the only car I actually drive myself anymore." Sophie ran her hand over the leather seat. "Okay, I'll admit, this is pretty cool. Where would you like to go?" "You said I could choose?" "You said normal. You know Atlanta better than I do these days. Show me your world." Sophie directed him to the East Side Beltline, where they walked among the evening crowd joggers, dog walkers, couples holding hands, artists selling paintings under string lights. They ate tacos from a food truck, drank beer from plastic cups, and sat on a bench watching street performers compete for tips. "This is what I miss," Darius said quietly. "Being anonymous. Being just another person in the crowd." "You're not exactly blending in with that suit," Sophie pointed out. Darius looked down at his white linen pants and white button-down shirt. "I suppose not. But at least no one's asking for my autograph or pitching me business deals. Does that happen a lot?" "More than you'd think. It's exhausting, honestly. Always being on. Sophie studied him in the fading light. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why me?" "And I don't mean that in a self-deprecating way. I genuinely want to know. You could have any woman in Atlanta. Hell, probably any woman in America. Why pursue someone who wrote you a slightly impertinent note?" Darius took a long moment before answering. "Because you saw me. Not Big Boss Darius. Not the billionaire. Not the brand. You saw a lonely man and had enough compassion to say something. That's rarer than you think." He turned to face her fully. "And because, when I'm with you, I don't feel like I have to be anything other than myself. Do you know how intoxicating that is after decades of performance?" "Sir," Sophie said, that teasing lilt back in her voice. "You're blushing again. Stop calling me sir, but you blush every time. And it's absolutely adorable." "I'm a 62-year-old man. I'm not adorable." "You absolutely are. Especially when you're flustered." Darius shook his head, but he was smiling. "You're going to be trouble, aren't you?" "Probably," Sophie agreed. "The question is whether you can handle it." He took her hand the first time he'd initiated physical contact and was relieved when she didn't pull away. "I'd like to try." They walked the Beltline until the lights came on, talking about everything: politics, music, food, travel, dreams deferred, and dreams yet to be pursued. By the time Darius drove her home, Sophie's reservations had softened, though not entirely disappeared. "I'm still scared," she admitted as they sat in her driveway, the Impala's engine idling softly. "So am I," Darius said. "Terrified, actually, but I think that might be a good sign." "How do you figure?" "Because it means it matters. We don't get scared over things that don't matter." Sophie leaned over and kissed his cheek, quick, impulsive, brave. "Okay, we'll try this, whatever this is. But slowly, and with ground rules. Name them. No extravagant gifts. No showing up at my work with flowers and mariachi bands. No trying to fix my life or pay off my debts or any of that pretty woman nonsense. If we're doing this, we're doing it as equals, which means you respect that I have pride even if I don't have money." "Deal," Darius said immediately. "Any other rules?" "Just one. Be honest with me. Always. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I can handle a lot of things, but I can't handle lies." "I can do that," Darius promised. "Honesty. Even when it's hard." "Then I'll see you again, Darius." Just Darius. He watched her walk to her apartment, waited until she was safely inside, and drove home feeling like he'd just won a negotiation worth more than all his properties combined. For 3 weeks, they existed in a careful bubble. Darius took her to jazz clubs in downtown Atlanta, to art galleries in the West Side, to his private box at the Fox Theater, where they watched a revival of The Color Purple, and Sophie cried during I'm Here. She took him to her favorite coffee shop in Little Five Points, to a pottery class, where he made a lopsided bowl that she insisted was abstract and beautiful, to her friend's basement comedy show, where the drinks were cheap and the jokes were cheaper. They talked on the phone every night. Conversations that stretched past midnight, meandering through topics with the easy comfort of people genuinely interested in each other's thoughts. Darius found himself laughing more, smiling more, feeling more present in his own life than he had in years. But reality has a way of intruding on even the most carefully constructed bubbles. The first crack came from an unexpected source: his daughter, Jasmine. At 35, she ran the philanthropic arm of Monroe Enterprises and had very specific opinions about her father's life choices. She showed up at his Buckhead penthouse on a Tuesday evening, let herself in with her key, and found Darius cooking dinner, something he never did. "You're cooking?" Jasmine said, setting her Birkin bag on the counter. "Are you ill? Should I call someone?" "I'm making spaghetti carbonara," Darius said, stirring pasta. "And before you ask, yes, I looked up the recipe. And yes, I've burned it twice already today. Who are you? And what have you done with my father?" Darius smiled. Sit down, baby girl. We should talk. Over dinner, which turned out surprisingly edible, Darius told his daughter about Sophie. Not everything, but enough. Enough for Jasmine to understand this wasn't a casual fling or a passing distraction. Let me get this straight, Jasmine said, setting down her fork. You've been seeing a woman you met because she left you a note, and she works as a housekeeper? She owned a catering business that failed during the pandemic. And yes, she currently works in cleaning services. Is that a problem? Dad, I'm not judging her profession. I'm judging the optics. You're Big Boss Darius. You have a brand, a reputation, business partners who expect a certain image. Dating someone from "Don't finish that sentence," Darius said quietly, but with an edge that made Jasmine pause. Don't you dare finish that sentence. I'm just saying, you're saying what society expects me to say, what the board would expect me to say, what everyone in our circle would expect me to say. He leaned back in his chair. And I'm telling you that for the first time in 15 years, I'm happy. Genuinely happy. Not satisfied, not content, not comfortable. Happy. And if that doesn't fit the brand, then maybe the brand needs to evolve. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment. You really care about her? I really do. Then I want to meet her. If she's going to be in your life, I want to know who she is. She's not ready for that yet, Darius said. This is all very new, and she's navigating a lot of complicated feelings about our different circumstances. I need you to trust me on this. I do trust you, Jasmine said. I just don't want to see you get hurt. Again, neither do I. But I'm willing to risk it. The second crack came from Sophie's world. Her best friend, Rachel, had concerns that she didn't bother to sugarcoat when she cornered Sophie at their weekly brunch at the Flying Biscuit. I'm worried about you, Rachel said, pushing her grits around her plate. You're falling for a billionaire who lives in a completely different stratosphere. What happens when this ends? Because it's going to end, Soph. These things always do. You don't know that, Sophie said, defensive. I know that men like him don't end up with women like us. I'm not being mean. I'm being realistic. He's got a daughter, business obligations, a social circle that's going to eat you alive the second they find out about you. And they will find out. I'm not some secret. Darius isn't hiding me, yet. But wait until the society pages get wind of this. Wait until his business partners start raising eyebrows. Wait until he has to choose between you and his reputation. Rachel reached across the table, taking Sophie's hand. I love you, and I want you to be happy. But I also don't want to watch you get your heart shattered by a man who, no matter how nice he is, lives in a world where you're always going to be an outsider. Sophie pulled her hand back. Thanks for the vote of confidence. I'm just trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need support. They finished brunch in tense silence, and Sophie left feeling shaken in a way she hadn't been since that first phone call. The third crack, the one that nearly shattered everything, came during what should have been a perfect evening. Darius had invited Sophie to a private charity gala at the High Museum of Art. It was small, intimate, just 50 guests, raising money for arts education in underserved communities. He'd been careful to frame it as low-key, had promised her there would be no press, no photographers, just people who cared about the cause. Sophie had bought a dress from a consignment shop in Buckhead, something simple and elegant that had probably cost a fortune new, but she'd gotten for $80. She'd felt beautiful walking in on Darius's arm, felt the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. For the first hour, it was wonderful. Darius introduced her to artists, educators, philanthropists who were genuinely passionate about the cause. No one asked what she did for a living. No one seemed to care about anything other than the conversation at hand. Then Veronica Ashworth arrived. Veronica was old Atlanta money, the kind of woman who'd been born into privilege and wore it like a second skin. She and Darius had dated briefly years ago, something he'd failed to mention to Sophie, and she had very specific opinions about who belonged in their social circle. Darius, Veronica said, gliding over in a dress that probably cost more than Sophie's car. "How wonderful to see you. And who is this charming creature?" Sophie felt the condescension in the word creature, but kept her smile steady. "Sophie Crane. Pleasure to meet you." "Crane," Veronica repeated, as if testing the name for worthiness. "I don't believe we've met. Are you in the arts?" "I work in hospitality services," Sophie said, using the euphemism she'd prepared. "How lovely. Darius does appreciate supporting local businesses." The dismissiveness was subtle but unmistakable. "And how did you two meet?" Before Sophie could answer, Darius stepped in. "Sophie left me a note that changed my perspective on quite a few things. We've been seeing each other since." "A note," Veronica said, her smile sharpening. "How quaint." The conversation continued for another excruciating 5 minutes before Veronica excused herself, but the damage was done. Sophie felt the shift in the room, the subtle glances, the whispered conversations, the way certain people suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere when Darius tried to introduce her. By the time they left, Sophie's smile felt like it might crack her face in half. "I'm so sorry," Darius said in the car. "Veronica is complicated. She's always been territorial about our social circle." "She's not the problem," Sophie said quietly. "The problem is that she's right. I don't belong there. I could feel it in every conversation, every introduction. People were polite because you're Darius Kincaid Monroe, but the second your back was turned, I could see what they really thought." "Who cares what they think?" "You should," Sophie said, her voice rising, "because those are your people, your world, your daughter's world, and I'm—" "What? You're what?" "I'm a novelty. I'm the feel-good story you tell at dinner parties. The housekeeper you're dating to prove you're not out of touch. But eventually, the novelty wears off. And then what? You wake up one day and realize your business partners are uncomfortable, your daughter's embarrassed, and you've tied yourself to someone who makes your life more complicated instead of easier." "Stop," Darius said firmly. "Stop putting words in my mouth and thoughts in my head. I know what I want, Sophie. And I want you, for now," she whispered. "But what about 6 months from now? A year? When the shine wears off and reality sets in?" They rode the rest of the way to her apartment in silence. When Darius pulled up to her building, Sophie turned to him with tears in her eyes. "I think we need to take a break," she said. "I need time to think about whether I can actually do this. Whether I'm strong enough to handle being the square peg everyone's trying to force into a round hole." "Sophie, please," she said. "Just give me some space. A week, maybe 2. I need to figure out if this is real, or if we're both just lonely people clinging to a fantasy." She got out of the car before he could respond, and Darius sat in her driveway long after her lights went out, feeling like he'd just lost something irreplaceable. Darius gave Sophie space, even though every instinct screamed at him to fight for her. He went through the motions, board meetings, property inspections, dinner with Jasmine where his daughter took one look at his face and said, "You look like someone kicked your dog." "I don't have a dog." "Exactly my point. Call her Dad." She asked for space. She asked for space because she's scared. There's a difference. On the 6th day, Darius couldn't take it anymore. But instead of calling Sophie, he called Rachel. They met at a coffee shop in Decatur, and Rachel looked deeply suspicious when he walked in. "If this is some kind of pretty woman gesture where you try to buy my support," Rachel said flatly, "I will throw this coffee in your very expensive face." "I'm not here to buy anything," Darius said, sitting down. "I'm here because I love your best friend, and I need your help understanding how to fix this without making it worse." Rachel blinked. "You love her?" "Completely. Terrifyingly. I wake up thinking about her and fall asleep thinking about her, and the past 6 days have been torture. But she thinks I'm going to wake up one day and realize she's not worth the complications. And I need you to help me prove that's never going to happen." "Sir," Rachel said slowly, "you're blushing." "Everyone keeps telling me that," Darius muttered. Rachel studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Okay, here's the thing. Sophie's been through a lot. Her business failed, her engagement ended badly, and she spent the last few years rebuilding from scratch. She's strong, but she's also been hurt. And she's terrified of being hurt again, especially by someone who could hurt her in ways her ex never could. I would never. I know you wouldn't intentionally. But that's not what she's afraid of. She's afraid of being the one who's always out of place, of spending the rest of her life feeling like she's not enough. And honestly, after that disaster at the museum, I can't say her fears are completely unfounded. So what do? Rachel smiled. You prove her wrong. Not with money, not with grand gestures. You prove to her that when it comes down to it, you'll choose her over everything else. Every time, without hesitation. How do I do that? That's the part you have to figure out yourself. But here's a hint. She doesn't need you to fit her into your world. She needs to know you'd build a whole new world if it meant being with her. 2 days later, Sophie came home from work to find Darius sitting on her apartment building's front steps, wearing jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, the first time she'd seen him in anything other than his signature white. "You're out of uniform," she said, stopping a few feet away. "I decided the uniform was part of the problem," Darius said, standing. "Can we talk?" Sophie nodded. And they walked to the nearby park, finding an empty bench under an oak tree that had probably been there longer than both of them combined. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Darius said. "About what you said. About being a square peg. And you're right, my world is filled with people who care more about appearance than substance. People who would judge you for your job, your bank account, your lack of designer clothes, and I can't change that. I can't make them different." Sophie felt her heart sink. This was it, the breakup speech. "But," Darius continued, "I can change what I prioritize. I can change who I spend time with. I can change the narrative about who I am and what I value. And most importantly, I can make damn sure that you never doubt for 1 second that I choose you every single time. Without question." "Darius, I'm not finished. I've spent the last week re-evaluating everything. I'm stepping back from the social scene. I'm limiting my attendance at those ridiculous galas to the absolute minimum. I'm restructuring my schedule so I have more time for the things and people that actually matter. And I'm putting Jasmine in charge of handling any business associates who have opinions about my personal life. You can't rearrange your entire life because of me. I'm not rearranging it because of you. I'm rearranging it for me. Because you were right about something else, too. I was lonely. I was going through the motions of a life that looked impressive on paper but felt hollow in practice. You didn't just see that loneliness, Sophie. You gave me permission to acknowledge it, to want more, to want real." Sophie felt tears prickling her eyes. "I was so scared at that museum, scared that I'd never be enough, that you'd always have to explain me or apologize for me or—" "Stop," Darius said gently, taking her hands. "You are enough. You've always been enough. The problem was never you. It was a world that's forgotten how to value substance over status. And if being with you means walking away from that world, then consider it walked away from—" "You'd really do that?" "I'd do anything," Darius said. "For the first time in decades, I feel alive. I feel seen. I feel like myself. And that's because of you. So yes, I'd do anything." Sophie laughed through her tears. "Sir, you're blushing again." "I know," Darius said, pulling her close. "And I'm done being embarrassed about it." They sat on that bench as the afternoon turned to evening, making plans that were equal parts practical and impossible. Darius would scale back his public life. Sophie would consider letting him invest in her dream cafe as a business partner, not a benefactor. They would navigate the judgment and the whispers together, presenting a united front to anyone who questioned their unconventional pairing. "This isn't going to be easy," Sophie said. "Nothing worth having ever is," Darius replied. "Your daughter might take a while to come around. Jasmine's already planning brunch with you next Sunday. She called me yesterday and said, and I quote, If this woman makes you cook dinner, I need to meet her immediately. Sophie laughed. I can handle brunch. And Rachel? Rachel thinks you're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. She hasn't decided which yet. I'll take either one. They walked back to her apartment as the streetlights flickered on, and when they reached her door, Sophie turned to face him fully. I love you, she said. I've been too scared to say it, but I do. I love you, Darius Kincaid Monroe. Just Darius. The man who blushes when I call him sir, and who's learning to cook, and who sees me as an equal even when the rest of the world doesn't. I love you too, Darius said, and kissed her with the kind of certainty that only comes from knowing you've found something rare and real and worth fighting for. 6 months later, they were still navigating the complications, still dealing with raised eyebrows and uncomfortable questions, still figuring out how to blend two very different worlds. But they were doing it together. And that made all the difference. Sophie's Cafe opened in the spring, a cozy spot in East Atlanta Village where the coffee was strong, the pastries were made from her grandmother's recipes, and nobody cared what you did for a living as long as you treated people with kindness. Darius was there every morning at 7 a.m., reading the newspaper in his usual corner booth, wearing jeans more often than his signature white suit. He'd learned that happiness wasn't about maintaining an image or living up to expectations. It was about finding someone who saw past all of that to the person underneath. Someone who wasn't afraid to tell you when you were blushing, or when your loneliness was showing, or when you needed to take a step back and remember what actually mattered. Sophie had given him all of that and more. And in return, he'd given her something she'd thought was lost forever. The belief that her best years weren't behind her, that success wasn't defined by bank accounts or business empires, but by finding genuine connection in a world that often felt designed to prevent it. They weren't perfect. Their relationship wasn't without complications, but it was real and honest, and filled with the kind of love that comes from truly seeing another person and choosing them anyway. And every time Sophie called him sir, just to watch him blush, Darius was reminded that the best things in life were the ones you never saw coming. The ones that arrived disguised as accidents and mistakes and scheduling mix-ups. The ones that started with a handwritten note and ended with a man learning how to be vulnerable again. The ones that proved, beyond any doubt, that loneliness didn't have to be permanent, and that sometimes the person who saves you is the one you least expect. So there you have it, folks. Big Boss Darius found his match in the most unexpected place, and Sophie discovered that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most beautiful rewards. If this story reminded you that love doesn't care about bank accounts or social status, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment and let me know, would you have the courage to walk into a world where you didn't belong for the chance at real love? Or are you team stay in your lane? I want to hear your thoughts. And if you love this one, stick around, because we've got more stories about Big Boss Darius coming your way. Until next time, remember, your loneliness doesn't have to be permanent, and sometimes the best love stories start with the simplest gestures. Peace out.